Good morning, everybody, and what exciting start we've got to the morning. Thank you very much. As you can see, I've got a great panel joining me here. We have John McDonald from ABS, and Øyvind Lindeman from Navigator Gas, Morten Høegh from Høegh, obviously, and Anders Onarheim and Oystein Kalleklev from Flex. So what we're going to try and do is take you on a little journey of what's been happening with the situation with Russian gas to start off, and we will try and go from the start of what's happening, or happened, sorry, through to where we are today. And so, looking back a little bit on what has happened, I'd like to open to all the panel and ask them what particularly just keeping it to one or the other, what is the most significant upside or downside for their companies in what's happened with the situation in Russia and Ukraine and the pullback from Russian gas. Who would like to kick us off? Any volunteers? Otherwise, I'm going to pick somebody. So,
well, from Navigator Gas point of view, it's clearly what happened in ammonia. So, because of the conflict or war in Russia and Ukraine, 20-25% of ammonia exports were effectively shut out from the market.
Okay.
So that had a big impact on the gas carrier industry that were shipping ammonia. So Europeans were short, and they had to look elsewhere, further afield, to source their ammonia supply. And that had a big impact on ton-mile demand, because the shipping fleet didn't change, therefore they had to sail longer, and that was a positive from a shipping point of view in the ammonia trade. And that has not solved itself to this day. So it's still a big issue.
Okay.
So I'm sad to say that for the audience that food prices will still rise because ammonia is used as fertilizer and the world is short of it at the moment.
Okay, thank you. So, John, please go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I'll go down. I'll go down the line here and pick up. I mean, when the crisis started, of course, the first thing that we made sure our people were safe, and our clients that we were working with, that we were addressing their needs. Of course, we had a significant supply chain kind of squeeze as far as what was being manufactured in Ukraine, what was actually in Russia as well, and how we handled that with our clients, and also attending the vessels within the ports in the area. So that was pretty significant. But what actually kept me up at night was making sure that our people were safe, and the clients that we were, and the seafarers that were in these ports, that they were well kept after. So big supply chain conflict, though, as far as taking care of things and supporting the materials that were being sent from Ukraine to either yards or the repairs that were being done. So to keep things moving was pretty significant from that business impact side.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Yeah. For our company, Höegh LNG, which specializes in FSRUs, FSRUs are floating import LNG terminals. So we were right in the sweet spot of what dawned on Europe after the start of the war, that all the Russian pipeline volumes would be at risk, and indeed most of them have disappeared subsequently. And many countries around Europe, most notably Germany, realized that they did not have sufficient LNG import capacity. Germany had none at the start of the war, so there was a scramble to put in place the infrastructure and then for them to source volumes. And what was really interesting is really the speed at which this happened. So literally within a few weeks after the outbreak of the war, all available FSRUs in the global market essentially was scooped up and put onto contracts in Europe. So right in the beginning, it was all about making sure that we were able to match the speed and to try to make as much capacity available. A year on from that point, we now have 3 FSRUs operating in Germany. So they represent really critical strategic infrastructure in Germany. So of course they are very prominent, and it's important that we manage to operate them, keep them on hire. But of course there's also new and heightened sort of security risks that we need to be conscious of, including cyber. So if there's anything that keeps me up at night, it would be sort of the whole risk picture around the operations in Europe.
Thank you, Morten. Anders, please.
I don't think I stayed awake at night, but I think, of course, with the general uncertainty, I think we all started to wonder what's going to happen. It was mentioned already, the crew safety. Of course, that's something we need to take very seriously. And again, before we sort of knew what the pattern was, it was difficult. Within LPG, of course, also, the question was, we had a very nice ton-mile trade, historically, with this shift, so that more of the LPG will go to Europe. Of course, that's given the extreme situation. We really thought that more LPG would actually hit Europe. But as it proved to be, our normal trade still stayed intact. Yes, there was some additional demand from Europe, but overall, the trade stayed the way it was. I guess also this became really an opportunity within LPG. We saw, of course, that so much of LNG was going to Europe, and so in that sense, there were 7 billion people out there still needing energy, and LPG has proven to be extremely versatile and a great energy source for many places where you don't have the infrastructure, of course, to receive the LNG. So again, perhaps more opportunities than actually threats that we saw.
Yeah, if I could just start with Avance gas, I think everybody been a bit surprised, even Anders and myself, about how strong the market's been this year. Everybody expected the market to be extremely soft because of 50% order book to fleet ratio for delivery this year. So far, been a lot of slippage. 2 out of the 3 main routes is today being traded at above $100,000 per day on the spot freight. And the only route below $100,000 is US to Far East at about $85,000. Do you have a scrubber, you may be making 90. So it's been a very interesting year. We did expect some slippage. Slippage has arrived, and then of course the Panama Canal is really disrupting the trade. The volatility in waiting days is going up, and which means people have to schedule around the Panama and really avoid it and let the LNG carriers and the container ships do the Panama Canal, while VLGCs are basically being priced out of the canal. So that is supportive of the freight. In terms of Flex LNG, which I'm also running, it's a bit similar to what Morten here talked about. Of course, it's been a major shift of trade from Asia to Europe. Of course, that has created more demand for LPG in Asia. But, and we see this continuing this year as well. If you have spot ships in the LNG space today, rates are actually terrible, but there's not really any independent owners left, because cargo economics went to such a high level where the big players chartered in, just like FSRUs, the big players here chartered in all the ships, more or less. So they are controlling both the cargo market and the freight market in LNG right now. Right now, it seems like the crisis in Europe is over. LNG prices is lowest since summer 2021. And actually, we are now at a level where, of course, in Europe, it's coal to gas switching because of the high CO2 prices. But actually, in Asia, you can also buy spot LNG now to prices below coal, depending a bit on the quality of the coal. So I do think we will see more demand drivers for LNG certainly with these kind of prices, because there's been demand destruction on LNG side because of these prices, but I don't really think it's permanently destroyed. It's more subversion of demand, and that demand is coming back now with these very low prices.
Thank you. If I could just follow up, Anders, with you. You were saying about LPG and not quite as expected. Do you think that it's the situation with Russia and Ukraine that is going to move things forward, or do you think it's more the environmental side of things that's been pushing things?
No, I think clearly. I mean, Russia was not a big exporter of LPG, and so it's been mostly for us, I think, indirect effects. Clearly, you know, with when it appeared how risky it was to just rely on, you know, a few sources of energy like Germany did and other places. I think it's quite clear that you know, you have to think about this over time as transition. And LPG became, you know, with the U.S. production, U.S. becoming more important, the production, you know, in the U.S. is really key for us. And so with the good exports from the U.S., that's been the main driver of and still underlying good demand in China, Japan, Korea. That's been the main driver of the LPG, you know, and why the market is so strong.
Thank you. If I could just ask maybe a joint question to Morten and Oystein. In terms of when this happened, being a public company versus a private company, obviously I know you can't comment too much, but in terms of being nimble, in terms of being private or being public, how do you feel that affected your situation? Morten, maybe if you'd like to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that having been a public company and recently gone private at the time that this crisis broke out, which represented, you know, a major opportunity in our market, I think it was definitely very positive to be private. But I would have said the same thing also in the absence of a crisis like the one we experienced last year. Simply that FSRU business is a sort of very project-oriented business. These projects take a long time to develop, sometimes get delayed, perhaps more often get delayed. And it's a business and a business model that doesn't sit very well in a public entity. So for FSRUs, I think that being private, and you know, we've gone private, some of our competitors have also gone private, and it's a type of business that as I said, sits best in a private structure, in contrast with you.
Yeah, I think for us it's been good in the sense that's become more public awareness about security of supply and of course the LNG space in general. So we've of course seen more investor interest for the company. We are not really securing 10-year deals with the German Bundesrepublik like Morten is doing. So we are doing time charters with more like the super majors for, you know, typically these days 5 to 10 years. So it's really, you know, we transformed the company from a speculative shipping company because that was what our start was. We ordered 13 ships when the prices was $180 to $185 million per ship. Today it's 260, and the lead time is much longer as well. And then we fixed those ships out on long-term charters where we just monetize that opportunity through long-term charters, which are fixed price. And created a yield company out of the shipping company instead. And that is something people like today, even though you get 5% on a risk-free rate today, because 10-year rates are much lower. So nobody expects the interest rates to stay at this level. And then if you can pay out 10-12% dividend yield every year, that is quite attractive, especially when you also do have some inflation protection in these assets which we are owning.
Okay, thank you. Øyvind, if I can come back to you. The current situation, do you think that is set to continue with new projects coming on stream? Do you think it would have been the same had the crisis not happened? Thank you.
No, I think it was definitely a wake-up call for many governments, particularly in Europe. And therefore it's kick-started all sorts of thinking and procedures. So, for instance, in Germany, where it was almost verboten to talk about expanding terminals and so forth, now they're fast-tracking to unlock the bottlenecks to get energy in whatever shape into the country. So clearly it's a wake-up, and it's accelerated lots of discussions. So for business, for shipping, that needs to import, or they need to import, we ship it for them, this group of people, then that's a good thing. And you know, where does it come from is another question, which obviously US is the big locomotive for LPG, for ammonia going to be, and for LNG. So the linkages between across the Atlantic will just be strengthened. And you know, that will continue.
Thank you. So I guess that leads us nicely in. So John, I mean, what can the class societies do to help the owners here with this changing businesses? Do you have any particular insights as to how the ship owner and the class societies can work together better in light of what's happened in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, one thing I'll just kind of off of the comment around the U.S. kind of flow is, you know, over the past couple of years, we've had this shift of the gas going from Asia to U.S. to Europe. I think this past year, 70% of all LNG coming from the U.S. was headed to Europe. And that's pretty significant as far as the change in the ton mile. And you mentioned LPG as well. Ethane's another. So we're seeing this shift, and we definitely see this continue. And this will, you know, at this point, LNG is on with the U.S. is on par with Australia, Qatar, as far as that amount of output. And you know, from a class standpoint, we're shifting to make sure that we're serving the clients as they move. We're working on training. So we talk about the growth in LNG and gas in general, and not only gas as a cargo, but gas as a fuel. And you talk about how we work with the clients and what those solutions are out there. There's a significant gap in the capabilities, the competencies of crews, basically in the industry as a whole. As you start looking at the new technology, the digitalization of the industry, and these alternate fuels that are coming into play, the safety concerns that we have to be aware of. The seafarers of today don't have that training in the capacity that we need going forward. And that actually includes class societies as well, the training that's needed. So one thing that we're very focused on is supporting training. We're doing a lot of using technology around metaships and simulation, and putting very, very robust training programs around the gas market.
Yeah. I mean, class societies traditionally have been a feeder for some of the shipping companies in terms of staff. Is that something you're having to go from the sort of the bottom up in training a lot more young people thinking to the future and that they have a mind to the new technology, or is it we're all trying to fight over the same people?
Yeah, that as I travel around the globe, that is a bit of a discussion point, is fighting around the same people sometimes. But no, you know, we're definitely, as I said, putting in a lot of robust training, and I think we mentioned earlier, collaboration is, I think Knut mentioned it, is the fuel of the way we go forward. And we're collaborating with governments, with clients, with other companies as far as putting out very robust training programs so that we can further educate and get the seafarers of tomorrow ready for the change in the industry as far as these new market segments that are growing.
Thank you.
Jason, I mean, I think it's, you know, yes, the conflict heightened the awareness of energy security, but I think, you know, shipping, we've done a lot of things, you know, started this transition long before the conflict started. At BWLPG, we already made a decision to convert 15 of our older ships, you know, to go on dual fuel. And a lot of technology has been invested in. At the same time, I think this crisis has shown us that we cannot go from A to B. We have to do this in a way that we have control over. And I think for us to, you know, I think the shipping community, actually, we should be proud of how much we've accomplished. So to me, I think the key now is to make sure there are good incentives to invest in technology, you know, and make sure that this transition happens in a good way. And gas clearly has become, you know, it was sort of a no-no in Europe. Now we see how important gas is, and it's going to play an important role for a long time.
I mean, perhaps obviously, Oystein, you had ships ready to go. Morten, you had FSRUs ready to go. I guess that this wasn't something anyone could have necessarily foreseen. But was it the environmental drivers that had you thinking towards the future, that gas was going to be the future? Or was it actually that you felt that it was a good time to invest because of low ship prices and low FSRU prices, and that was the driver behind moving to the future? Oystein?
Yeah, I think in the LNG it's more that the technological change in the terms of the machinery in the LNG ships has gone much slower than a lot of the other segments. So, of course, certainly 2014 or so, you know, you could order ships with a slow-speed two-stroke engines because then the technology was developed for having that. Until that, you had the four-stroke medium-speed diesel-electric, and prior to that, the steam. So then you have new ships which are 60% more efficient, and you know the IMO kind of requirements in the beginning was to have a 70% reduction in carbon intensity by 2015. And we could do that when we took delivery of ships in 2018. We already had ships 60% more efficient than the steam generation of ships. So, of course, that's a compelling story because it's not only about the environment, it's also about economics. So suddenly you have a ship which is much more fuel efficient. You can have a bigger parcel and you consume less of basically the cargo, which is the LNG boil-off. So, and when at the same time prices was at rock bottom levels, it really made sense to go all in and order these ships because we saw the growth from US in terms of liquefaction capacity, and our plan was to then charter those ships out on long-term charters in 2020. Unfortunately, we got a bit delayed because of the COVID. So I think that's the reason, and that's why we have had a good progress in terms of decarbonization, because these older steamships, they have to leave the fleet. In terms of the Avance LPG, Anders, he's been retrofitting some of his ships. We ordered 6 new ships, dual fuel ships, so they can burn LPG, similar to a LNG carrier, and you have a bigger parcel size, and the fuel consumption is less. So suddenly you are reducing your fuel consumption by 40% compared to our 2015 ships. So of course, when you're trading in the spot market, that really means that when you are on a voyage charter and you are paying for your own fuel, you are much more cost competitive towards your, especially if people are trading the 2008-9 ships, having a lot more fuel consumption, smaller parcel size. When those people are, running at OPEX level, you are making a decent profit. So it's more about investing smart. Those ships cost 80 million when we order them. Today it would be 105, and you would have longer lead time.
And it's $7,000 fuel savings at the moment.
I mean, we on that, we've seen a shift, though, with gas-capable ships running on fuel oil because of the cost change. So do we take from that the environmental concerns are less than the economic concerns in terms of...
It's about both. Of course, we are not Greenpeace. We are not trading our ships for the environment. We're trading them for economics. Mm-hmm. And of course, if we can do something good for the environment as well and get the good CIA ratings, we do both.
And for us, it was just a matter of future-proofing our fleet. We saw that this was a good way for us. Instead of investing in new ships, we could use our existing ships as a leading player in the LPG sector. Instead of going out and making the order book even bigger, we decided to do it that way. Of course, the footprint also of retrofitting is quite much smaller than a new build. So it's both.
And of course, the last item is, of course, the product we are carrying. What is it for? It's basically getting rid of coal. That's the ultimate solution here, getting rid of coal. And in order to do that, you need to have a hydrocarbon which is much more environmentally friendly. And also, we shouldn't forget about the local air quality pollution. CO2 emissions, LNG compared to coal, 50-60% reduction. But where you see the real big reductions is sulfur, NOx, and especially particulate matter, where it's basically 99% reduction. And this is why, of course, Europe started with gas in the 60s, because you wanted to get rid of the local air pollution, not really the CO2.
Thank you. Morten, if I could come back to you on the FSRUs. Obviously, you were putting quite a few into Europe, and you were prepared. Whether or not that was that you had a crystal ball somewhere, or whether or not you just happened to have the vessels ready. But I mean, firstly that obviously, but secondly, dealing with governments versus dealing with individual projects. Most of them are obviously government-driven. Is that more of a challenge than maybe dealing with private companies and or companies that are not governmental?
A couple of comments. We certainly did not build up our FSRU fleet in anticipation of what played out a year ago. It was really about building units against projects, typically in developing economies, where there was an requirement to import LNG to generate more electricity. It's no secret that the FSRU market was slow up until 2020 or through 2021. A number of projects didn't go ahead or collapsed for various reasons. So we and others had available ships that could be picked up or ended up being picked up when the crisis started. Had it happened a year earlier, we would have had even more units available that we could have offered into to Europe. When it comes to your second question, I think our experience over the years, both recently in Europe but also elsewhere in the world prior to this, is that the best projects, the strongest projects, and the ones that are most likely to succeed when you start developing them at an early stage is where you have some sort of either direct or indirect government support. You need to have a market, the demand needs to be there, but to have government backing makes the projects more likely. Of course, there are a number of entirely private projects, but dealing with either public utilities, national oil companies is typically a strength. And in the crisis last year, I think one of the most remarkable things is actually how quickly governments and the commercial companies that acted as agents for the government. So for instance, in Germany, the government essentially instructed Uniper and RWE to essentially put the projects together. And the speed at which this happened and the speed at which big and very costly decisions were made by the politicians, I think surprised everyone. So just a sort of anecdote, Chancellor Olaf Scholz gave this landmark speech in the Bundestag 3 days after the war started, where he talked about military spending and all sorts of things that essentially there was a change of an era, new era in Germany. In that speech, he said that Germany would commission 2 LNG import terminals, which of course we found very interesting right away, and we reached out to our contacts in Germany the next day and asked the questions, okay, two LNG terminals on a fast-track basis, what does that mean? The answer back was first gas in somewhere between 2 and 4 years. And within 10 months, they had 3 FSRUs up and running. So really, it was remarkable how quickly things happened.
Is there a danger, though, that if you're dealing with governmental bodies, that yes, they can be very quick and they can cut through the red tape. If there's a regime change of some kind, is there any risk, or is it all contracted in and you feel comfortable with that?
I think in Europe that risk is relatively low. Of course, if you think about, okay, what's going to happen next? So there was this first wave to deal with the immediate crisis a year ago. I don't think that Europe as a whole is done in terms of taking on additional import capacity. There could be some land-based facilities, but there in all like will be a couple of more FSRU projects, both in Germany but also in some of the other key markets. But of course, at some point, this sense of urgency, sense of emergency will pass, and the market will sort of normalize back to a sort of fully commercial market or driven by ordinary commercial drivers. It won't be the same market as it was before the war, and it will take some time. But of course, if you take a 5, 10, 15-year perspective, of course, Europe, there will be a lot of floating import capacity in Europe, but it will become more commercial with time.
Thank you. I mean, as we're on the governmental side of things and the effects of that, if we can move just quickly to price capping and the effect of embargoes, or even if I could come to you, is it feasible to embargo or price cap oil? Does it have the intended effect? Does that feed through to the LPG markets in terms of, is processed oil actually embargoed, or should it be, or maybe you have an opinion?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm not an oil expert, but I'll answer that last. In terms of LPG, so there's an LPG export trade from the Baltic, so from Russia, that used to go to mainland continental Europe. It's not sanctioned. However, the importers, the buyers, the consumers are self-sanctioning. So the LPG is being sold at a discount, but Turkey will buy, India will buy, Africa will buy. So the impact is that the ships have to go longer, but there's no reduction in exports. Listening to some other folks during the morning, on the oil side, there's a huge grey trade, and a lot of people are making a lot of money, and it's not stopped. So in, you know, to answer your question, no, it doesn't work. Well, it worked for somebody. It depends on the eye of the beholder, but the shipping industry, the people who can do it and do it, and there's a lot of it, they're making a killing.
I think yeah, that seems to be self-evident now. John, then, if I can come to you, obviously as a US representative, obviously the geopolitical impact of what's happened has certainly impacted on US LNG. As we're talking about what the government would like, from a US perspective, would you like to comment at all on the impact of what's happened in the US for LNG and whether the sanctions have affected anything?
Yeah, well, most certainly, and I think I spoke a bit about it previous, but you know, we're seeing this significant growth of export of gas, LNG, specifically as we're talking about that, with exports shifting from Asia to Europe over the past year. As I mentioned, about 70% in 2022 of the LNG exports landed in Europe. 23 probably will be the same or greater. And now with Freeport coming back online, just to give you kind of a feel of how many vessels we're talking about, in April, there was 85 LNG loadouts, LNG carrier loadouts, and once Freeport came back online, there's 95, 96 loadouts. So that we're seeing that continue to grow, and we have 3 kind of major projects in play that are coming online. The Plaquemines LNG terminal. We've got the additional Corpus Christi growth coming online. So you're starting to see continued growth, gas coming out of the U.S., and Europe is really where it's going to at this point.
So if this all were to end, well, unfortunately not tomorrow, but if it were to all end quite quickly, or at some point in the future, can you see that reversing to some extent? Can you see the demand for U.S. gas reducing, or do you think that in the future going forwards, it's going to continue with US gas being the most attractive because of either maybe political realities or commercial realities?
No, I don't see that slowing down at all. I mean, you know, you've got the demand in Asia, and that can always be a market for US, of course, and as we bring on more facilities, more trains. But the Europe piece will continue to grow, I believe, and that shifted, as I said, the ton-mile calculation, and that that is an area of demand. So I don't see that slowing.
Okay,
And there's
thank you.
so much investment going into the U.S. at this point, and so many LNG carriers on order today that are coming out. The demand is there.
Thank you. I can see 2 microphones, post 3 now, actually.
Just a short comment. Just in terms of sanctions, there's no sanction on Russian LNG. Actually, European buyers are buying Russian LNG with both hands, and they've never bought more. So, so in terms of sanctions, there's nothing on the horizon for LNG. Some countries are mulling about maybe we should sanction Russian LNG, but there's not appetite for it.
Yeah. Okay. Morten, please.
I would just say that you know, the war will end one day, and perhaps there will be pipeline exports from Russia back to Europe, but it will never be at the same volumes and with the same reliance. So I think that one thing that we have been talking about for a long time when we have been marketing FSRUs is energy security, security of supply and the flexibility that FSRUs offer. We didn't get all that much attention historically for that argument. People pursued FSRU projects, you know, for other reasons, and of course that really has caught the attention of importers, not only in Europe but indeed across the globe.
So even if Russian pipeline gas is cheaper, you think that ethics will win out over economics?
I don't think it's ethics. I think people are thinking about redundancy, about insurers, and I think the sort of the fundamental, well, the sort of this notion, particularly in Germany, that relations would improve as a result of trade. It's failed spectacularly, and they will not make that mistake again. So perhaps you know, Germany could end up importing, let's say, 10% of their total requirements in a post-war scenario, but nowhere close to 50%, which was the case before.
Yeah, it would actually go to 70% if Nord Stream 2 was up and running, so which was crazy.
Yeah.
And for LPG, it's going to be, you know, business as usual. I think it's going to be U.S. still going to be an important, very important producer, and we've also, you know, this conflict has really just established even, you know, more markets for LPG. We're seeing, you know, we've sold 25 ships last 3 years. And these ships are all going into, you know, captive trades, whether it's to storage or just these, you know, these local trades. And so LPG has actually become, you know, given again that Europe has taken so much of the LNG, you know, the rest of the world has really, I think, got their eyes open for LPG. So we see that trade continuing very well.
Okay, thank you. Well, we just have a couple of minutes left, so I'd like to give the panel an opportunity, because I think it is an opportunity that at the moment we have MSC going on in London, we have MEPC coming up. Given what's happened in Ukraine, is there anything particularly that jumps out to any of you that you would like to, as a message to the regulators, that is something that they should be thinking going forward? So anybody who would like to, Morten, please.
Well, I also wear another hat. I'm chairman of the Guard P&I Club, and I think when you talk about oil tankers and the shadow fleets and the grey fleets, there's a big concern. Not only that the caps may not be working and a lot of oil is still being exported, but for the world as a whole and for the shipping industry as a whole, the fact that the number of ships that are now trading without proper insurance is a major concern, and should be a major concern for all of us. Because if there is a grounding with an oil spill anywhere in the world, or there's a collision between one of these ships without proper insurance and one of our ships, then we have the potential for a major catastrophe. And it's something that's not fully understood, both in the industry, but more importantly among regulators and governments. This can only be solved at the level of national governments, and I think that this week is a good opportunity to try to raise awareness around this big issue.
Thank you. Okay. So thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been an enthralling session, certainly for me. I hope for everyone in the audience as well. Well, thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Nick for the rest of the day. Thank you.